I remember exactly the day everything turned upside down in my home here in Texas. I just returned from a field trip for the company, still smelling of oil on my uniform, when I found my wife sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a smile I hadn't seen in a while. She turned the screen in my direction and said she had incredible news. The lawyer had just confirmed the release of an inheritance that she did not even expect to receive, something around $300,000, coming from a distant relative. I opened my mouth to say that I was happy for her, that we could use that money calmly, plan something for our future, but I didn't have time. Before any words left my mouth, she took a deep breath, stared at me coldly, and said she wanted a divorce. So, bluntly, as if he were talking about changing the car. I stood in the doorway, with the backpack still on my shoulder, feeling the weight of that sentence hit my chest like a punch. I asked her if she was serious, and she replied that she had never been so sure of anything in her life. He said that that money was the chance to start over from scratch, to live the life he always dreamed of, without having to be accountable to anyone. I was silent, but inside me something screamed. She kept talking, pacing the kitchen as if she had already rehearsed everything. She said she didn't want to fight, that she wasn't going to ask for anything from me, that her only wish was for the divorce paperwork to be resolved as soon as possible. He spoke as if he were doing me a favor. I didn't answer at the time. I sat down, took off my backpack, dropped the keys on the counter, and just watched. At that moment, I stopped being a victim. I became an observer. Something in the way she spoke, in the way she avoided looking into my eyes, showed me that it hadn't come out of nowhere. That conversation had been fed for a long time, perhaps in messages I didn't see, in meetings that took place while I worked extra hours to maintain the standard of living that she liked to show so much. My routine has always been heavy. I work as a senior petroleum engineer at a large company here in Texas. I earn more than $500,000 a year between salary, bonuses, and participation. There were years on board, sleepless nights, long meetings, and difficult decisions. I have always made a point of ensuring comfort at home. House in a safe neighborhood, car paid off, health insurance, bills up to date. While I counted each step, she counted likes. For some time now, my marriage had already been showing signs of wear, but I thought they were phases. She started going out more with new friends, going to places that had never been part of our routine, always saying that she deserved to enjoy life. I noticed small but constant changes. Too many new clothes arriving in a short time, expensive purchases made without talking to me, comments thrown in the air about men her age who were living intensely. I would come home tired from work and find her laughing at something on her phone, but when I got closer, the screen would lock too quickly. Once I accidentally overheard a friend of hers saying on speakerphone that she shouldn't miss the chance to be independent, that she was too young to be stuck with an older man. I listened from the stairs, standing still while the two talked as if I didn't exist. They spoke as if I were invisible. The inheritance fell like fuel on this fire that was already lit in secret. When the money appeared, she treated it as an exit passport. He said that he would finally have his own account, his own house, his own plans. The way she pronounced it herself was echoing in my head. I calmly asked her if she was sure what she was doing, if it was really just about freedom, or if there was something more. She got angry. He said that I always wanted to control everything, that I was too straight, that I didn't know how to live in the moment, that I thought too much about contracts and long-term. As she poured out these sentences, I just watched her, almost as if I was seeing a stranger taking the place of the woman I married. I realized that I didn't have to win by shouting. I had time. She packed her bags in less than a week. She separated some personal things, took the car that was in her name, and left without looking back. In front of the lawyer, she repeated that she didn't want anything from me, that the money she had received was more than enough, that she preferred to come clean and have no more ties. My lawyer stared at me for a second, surprised, but I just nodded. They had greed. I had the documents. The house, the investments, everything I had built over the years was still protected, because while she lived as if tomorrow was guaranteed, I signed and recorded every detail. When we left the office, she still said, with a smile at the corner of her mouth, that in 6 months I would see how much better she would be without me. I just replied with a calm, okay. Inside, I knew that the clock had started ticking, and that life would do the work that I didn't need to get my hands dirty to perform. When she walked out the door that day, I stood in the middle of the room as if watching the trail of something that never comes back the same. The house seemed bigger, quieter, almost strange. I made coffee, sat at the table and stared at the chair where she always sat. I didn't feel angry. I felt realized. That version of her hadn't lived with me for a long time. I just hadn't realized how much she had already left while she was still living here. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in work. He arrived early, left late, participated in long meetings, reviewed reports, guided teams in the extraction fields. All of this kept me focused and away from the questions that tried to settle in my head. When I got home, I found a silence that would have bothered me before, but now it felt like a kind of rest. It was strange to realize that her absence made the environment lighter. I didn't have to mince words, I didn't have to walk on eggshells, I didn't have to try to please someone who no longer wanted to be pleased. I began to observe my own life with a clarity that I hadn't had in a long time. I began to notice how I had become accustomed to small daily aggressions that, at the time, I called silly arguments, but now I saw as signs that something bigger was eating away at our marriage. I remembered when I arrived, tired, and she turned up her nose because I had forgotten something in the market. When I tried to talk about the future and she said I was too predictable. She also remembered the times I held her after a bad day at her work, while she said she didn't know who she really was. Maybe that inheritance gave her the chance to find that version of herself, but in the worst possible way. As the weeks went by, I confess that I noticed some things on her social networks. Not because I miss her, but because I wanted to understand which path she was choosing to take. In the first days after the divorce, the photos were all smiles, expensive drinks, short trips to places I recognized only by the scenery. She seemed free, loose, almost euphoric. Her friends were always around, the same ones who treated me as if I were an obstacle in her life. In each photo I saw exaggeration, expensive clothes, tables with bottles that cost half the rent of an apartment, captions talking about reborn, freedom, independence. I looked at it and thought that living intensely is great, but living without a foundation is just a fall in disguise. That's when I started to notice phase 2 of this kind of sudden freedom. 3 months later, travel slowed down. Photos with friends have become rarer. The expensive clothes gave way to simple looks that I had never seen her wear. A month later, the posts became almost non-existent. I realized everything, even though she thought Noon was paying attention. It wasn't that I was following her life out of obsession. It was like watching a building that you once helped build and now see cracking through the walls, not because you want to, but because you know exactly where the structure was fragile. The truth is that she never knew how to manage money. When we were married, I was the one who took care of everything. I paid the bills, organized investments, set up reserves, made projections. I knew how much came in and how much went out, and he knew how to differentiate between desire and need. She doesn't. She spent as if the balance were infinite, as if the account were a bottomless pit. When I realized that she was going into free fall, I didn't feel a victory. I felt confirmation. This is what happened when someone confuses freedom with impulse. I followed my life at my own pace. I went to work, came back, took care of the garden on weekends, did my shopping, arranged things in the garage, dined in restaurants that I always wanted to visit and had never gone to because she thought it was boring. My life began to fit into a quieter, almost comfortable routine. I slept better, ate better, thought better. And the more I put my life on track, the more I saw that this divorce had not been a tragedy. It had been a disguised release. 6 months later, on a Saturday afternoon, I'd been home for a few hours. I had just finished fixing the grill when I heard knocking on the door. They were not light beats. They were insistent, almost distressed. I walked to the door thinking it was a neighbor or someone from maintenance. When I opened it, there it was, my ex-wife, standing there with sunken eyes, simple clothes, hair tied up anyway, holding the bag with both hands as if that was the only anchor she had. She tried to smile, a faint, trembling smile, unlike any expression I had ever seen on her. He called me by my old nickname, the one he only used when he wanted something. I didn't say anything. She took a deep breath and asked to talk. She said that things hadn't gone as she imagined, that she had made mistakes, that her friends had disappeared, that the money ran out too quickly, that their aunt was late, that the car had given a problem, that she didn't know what else to do. I listened to everything quietly, leaning on the doorframe. She was there not out of nostalgia. He was there out of necessity. And deep down, I already knew that this moment would come, because life charges, and it charges in silence. When she finished speaking, She stood there waiting for some reaction from me, as if the mere fact of having appeared was enough to erase everything that had happened. I took a deep breath, kept my hand on the doorknob, and tried to understand which version of it I was seeing there. She wasn't the confident woman in the photos, nor the person who left my house as if she were marching towards a better life. She was someone broken by her own choices, someone who discovered too late that the world doesn't embrace those who act as if they would never fall. She asked to come in. The voice came out low, almost shaky, something I had never heard before. I took a step back, but not by invitation. I gave her space so that she didn't feel exposed in front of the neighborhood, because despite everything, I still had respect for myself, and this respect prevented me from making a show of the pain of others, even if that pain had been built on top of her decisions. She entered slowly, looking at everything as if it were the first time she had stepped there. The house was organized, clean, quiet. She realized this. He realized that I had not become a broken man after the divorce. On the contrary, the room had the same things, but the energy was different. She ran her hand over the couch, looked at the plants I had placed near the window, looked at the new lamp I bought. Small details, but which showed that life had not stopped without her. She sat down and I stood for a few seconds, trying to understand what exactly she wanted from this conversation. When I finally sat across the table, she tried to smile again, but the smile couldn't hold. She opened her bag and pulled out some crumpled papers. Overdue bills, collection notifications, proof of transfers that I recognized as bad choices. She pushed everything towards me, as if that explained everything by itself. He said he had no one to ask for help. He said he didn't know what to do, and he said something I never thought I'd hear, that he'd been an idiot. I kept looking at those papers, not because I needed them to understand the situation, but because they were physical proof of something I already knew from the day she filed for divorce. She confused freedom with irresponsibility. He thought that money was a solution, not fuel for falling. She thought that her friends who slapped her on the back were support, not audience. He thought I was the weight when in fact I was the structure. And now there, sitting at the same table where we once had coffee talking about plans, she had none left. At least, not solid plans. What she had were flimsy arguments, requests hidden within emotional sentences, and a desperate hope that I could do for her what her money couldn't do. She asked if I could help her, for now, until she reorganized. She asked if I had a spare room, if I could borrow some money, if I could at least help her find something cheaper. Her voice sounded like a distant reflection of that woman who one day tried to confront me thinking she had the world in her hands. I took a deep breath and stared at her. For the first time since she walked in, she kept her gaze steady on mine. That's when I realized that she expected me to be the same man as before. The man who tried to solve everything, who carried the weight, who protected even when he received nothing in return. But that man had changed. Not out of pride, for survival. I said I understood that she was going through difficulties. He said it was sad to see someone get to that point. But she also said that each choice had a cost, and that hers was knocking on the door at that moment. She lowered her eyes. She tried to justify it, saying that she had believed the wrong people, that she thought life would be simpler away from me, that money had given her a false sense of security. He apologized to me, not a strong, firm excuse, a broken excuse. She then asked if I held any grudges, and the truth is that I didn't keep it. I didn't have the energy for it. I said it wasn't about heartache, it was about consequence. He said that I couldn't carry decisions that weren't mine. I said that when she left me, she didn't give me any chance, that she chose to give up the life we had together without looking back, and that now she needed to face the result of this. She began to cry, a contained, frustrated cry. She said that I had always been too calm, and that this made her confused. I replied that calm was not weakness, it was consciousness, and what conscience was precisely what she lacked. We were silent for a few minutes, until she asked what I suggested she do. I could have taken advantage of that moment to hurt her with words, but I didn't have to. Life had already done that for me, so I just said that she needed to rebuild her own life, in her own way. That asking for help wasn't wrong, but that waiting for me to solve it all over again, era. She was silent, and in that silence I knew that the conversation was coming to an end. Because there, in that clean, quiet room, she had realized something that hurt more than any sermon. She was no longer a part of that life, and for the first time, I felt peace when I understood this. She sat there, her hands clasped together, staring at the table as if trying to find a hidden exit among the wood grains. Her silence was not light. It had weight, shame, and a request that she could not formulate out loud. I saw in her eyes the same expression I've seen in coworkers who lost everything due to wrong decisions. That mixture of regret and despair trying to occupy the same place inside the person. She took a deep breath and said that there was no one else. Her friends disappeared. The man she thought she would have something with disappeared as soon as her money started to run out. And even her family avoided getting involved because they already knew her impulsive ways well. She said that she never imagined that life could turn around so quickly, that she thought she had control of everything, that she believed that she could finally live as she wanted because she had enough money to start over. I listened to everything, without interrupting, because it was the first time she had spoken without trying to sound strong. When I finished listening, I got up slowly and went to the window. I looked at the backyard, at the garden I took care of on weekends, and thought about everything I had experienced in the last few months. I thought about the silence of the house, the tranquility of my mornings, the way my body relaxed after the emotional pressure came out of the walls. I thought about how I had rediscovered a version of myself that I no longer remembered existed, and I realized very clearly that allowing her to return to my routine would be like opening the door to everything I had finally managed to leave behind. I went back to the table and sat down. She watched me, hoping that I would say something that would solve her anguish. But I didn't have any solution that included rewriting the past. I said I understood what she was going through, but that it wasn't my responsibility to fix the damage of her decisions. She tried to argue, saying that I had financial conditions, that it was only temporary, that she wasn't asking for much. But the more she talked, the more it became clear that what she wanted wasn't help. It was a return to the comfort she had lost. She wanted to go back to the place she had abandoned, thinking it was too small for her. I stood firm, not out of coldness, but because I knew that if I took an emotional step in that direction, she would try to rebuild exactly the dynamic that destroyed our marriage. She asked if I hated her. I said no. Hating takes too much energy, and I had already spent all the energy I could on that relationship. I said that I hoped she would meet, but that it needed to happen based on her choices, not mine. She lowered her face, wiped away a tear, and said she never imagined I would be so firm. I replied that firmness is not born of pride. It is born from the pain that we learn not to repeat. I was silent for a few seconds, and then offered something that I knew was the limit of my clear conscience. I pointed her to some rental options, employment agencies, and community services that could help her get back on her feet. She didn't expect this. He was waiting for the old self, the man who solved everything, who carried everything, who sacrificed everything. But that man was no more. I had changed, not out of revenge, out of necessity. She took a deep breath, put the papers in her purse, and stood up slowly. He thanked him in an almost automatic way, as if he no longer had the strength to sustain a speech. He walked to the door without looking back. Before leaving, he put his hand on the doorknob and said he never imagined it would end up like that. I replied that no one imagines, but life shows, and it shows without discounts. When the door finally closed, I stood there for a few seconds. I didn't feel angry. I felt no joy. I felt peace. A peace that only comes when we understand that some things don't come back into our lives because they simply don't belong to it anymore. I took a deep breath, looked at the silent house, and realized that for the first time in a long time, that silence was not loneliness. It was freedom. When the door closed behind her, I stood for a few moments, listening to the sound of silence fill every corner of the house. It was curious to realize that the silence that had previously bothered me now seemed even necessary. I walked to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and stared out the window, remembering everything that had happened in these 6 months. It was as if I was watching an entire movie at slow speed, rewatching scenes that had previously hurt but now seemed distant, almost from another life. I realized there, looking at the backyard lit by the late afternoon, that this chapter had finally ended. Not because she had returned, but because I had changed enough to not allow her return to reopen wounds that were already healing. I sat on the couch and let my mind organize everything. I thought about how my life had taken a different turn after the divorce. I reconnected with myself, with my friends, with hobbies that I had put aside because marriage required constant attention. I started to do simple things that previously seemed impossible with all the tensions that surrounded that house. cook calmly, watch a game without being interrupted, go out for a walk in the neighborhood, take care of my finances without someone questioning every detail. The most important thing was not what I had lost. It was what I had recovered. As I thought about it, I remembered so many moments when I tried to save that marriage alone. Moments when I diminished myself so as not to create conflict, when I ignored clear signs of disrespect, when I tried to be the safe haven of someone who never wanted to anchor. And there, in that quiet house, I finally understood that love is not measured by how much you can handle, but by how much you grow together. And we hadn't been growing in years. We were just surviving. Some people say that life takes turns. I think life doesn't go around, she reveals. She reveals who is really by your side, reveals who only stayed because it was comfortable, reveals who runs at the first opportunity and who faces things head on. She revealed who she was, and it also revealed who I needed to be. I pulled out my phone and texted a friend asking if he wanted to have dinner later. He replied in seconds saying yes, and I smiled. I felt that finally I was living the kind of life I'd always wanted, a life that didn't depend on anyone's validation, let alone the presence of those who left thinking they had better options. As I was getting ready to leave, I passed by the table where she had left those crumpled papers. I looked at them for a moment, not out of pity, but because they were the perfect reminder of what happens when someone trades stability for euphoria, partnership for impulsiveness, loyalty for empty promises. I collected everything and threw it in the trash, not because I was trying to erase anything, but because it had no place in my life anymore. Just like her. When I took the car keys and turned off the lights in the room, I felt light. I felt whole. I opened the door, locked the house, and walked to the car feeling the hot Texas wind hit my face. And for the first time since it all began, I was able to think about the future, without fear, without weight, without that constant knot in my stomach. Life had given me a second chance to live the right way. Not a perfect life, not a life without challenges, but a life where I finally knew who I was and what I deserved. As I drove down the broad road, watching the sky change color, I realized that nothing she said, did, or chose defined anything in me anymore. Her fall was a consequence. My peace was a choice. I moved forward knowing that some doors close not to punish us, but to protect us. And that, on that day, was the most liberating door I have ever let close.